To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
Well, it's that time of the week again. Time for a good old-fashioned Disneyland video. And, as you could have guessed from today's title, we are going to talk about the historic Disneyland Railroad. Now, this is the first attraction you see upon entering Disneyland, and it is one of the oldest attractions at Disneyland, if not the oldest. It began with Walt's love of trains that grew in Marceline, Missouri, his childhood home. Walt would often sit by the train depot, and as his uncle worked for the railroad, whenever his uncle stopped into town on the railroad, he'd give Walt and his family gifts of candy and different toys from around the United States, which was pretty cool for back in the time, the early 1900s, when you couldn't just order something off of Amazon like you can today. Let's see here. All you gotta do is open up a book. Gotta look around here. Let's see. Railroad. Railroad hobby. There it is. This is taken from the book An American Original Walt Disney by Bob Thomas. Trains held almost a mystical fascination for Walt Disney, dating back to his Missouri days, from when he waved to his engineer uncle to feel the vibration of the tracks, and then to watch the passenger trains pass through en route to San Francisco. He delighted in operating his electric train for visitors to his office. Among them were two Disney animators, Ward Kimball, who had a full-size railroad on his property, and Ollie Johnston, who was building a 1/12 scale steam train at his home. Johnston invited Walt to watch the laying of the track and to visit the machine shop in Santa Monica where the locomotive was being built. Now you're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with the Disneyland Railroad? And I'm getting there. The two animators would later take Walt to the home of a man named Richard Jackson, who had a miniature railroad running inside his home, and that was all the inspiration Walt needed. He decided he was going to build his own railroad, the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, in his own backyard. Walt began looking for property for a new house that was large enough to support his railroad. Meanwhile, his wife Lillian wasn't too happy about this, so Walt did what any good businessman would do and wrote up a contract. Here I have taken a very low quality picture of the aforementioned contract so you guys can look over it at your own pace. Go ahead, take your time. It's pretty funny. Eventually, Walt and Lily both compromised. Lily got a larger house to be comfortable in, and Walt got a larger space outdoors for the Carrollwood Pacific to run. Walt named the engine of the brand new train the Lily Bell after his wife. See, now we're tying back to the Disneyland Railroad. Hold on. Sometime after the demise of the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, Walt began designing Mickey Mouse Park, an early incarnation of Disneyland. The park was supposed to be surrounded by a railroad, with a train station at one side of the main street and a town hall at the other side, replacing the castle, I'm assuming. Whenever Walt mentioned the Mickey Mouse Park to his brother Roy would remind Walt about all the debt that they've gone into with the Bank of America, but that apparently didn't seem to stop Walt, as we can clearly see today. Now, beginning with the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, Walt Disney loved miniatures, something that I can claim to have in common with Walt Disney, and Walt's love for miniatures, starting with the tiny train, the Carrollwood Pacific, eventually led to him building a small miniature set called Disneylandia. Eventually, the whole Disneylandia project grew in size until it gave way to what we know today as Disneyland. See? Full circle. Alright, enough with the history lesson. Let's get to what the title of this video is. Why is the Disneyland Railroad so important? I'm sure it's something most visitors just pass on their way to Space Mountain or the Haunted Mansion, but we need to take a moment to realize that the Disneyland Railroad is the entire history and reason Disneyland is there in the first place. I mean, come on, think about it. If Walt had never built the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad in his backyard, then he would have never built Disneylandia, which would have never given him the inspiration for Mickey Mouse Park, which then he would have never gotten the inspiration for Disneyland. I mean, of course, when Walt built his theme park, he'd want to have a railroad front and center, literally right when you walk into the park, and that's exactly what he did. Now let's get into some fun facts. The Disneyland Railroad has 4 stations: the Main Street Station, the New Orleans Square Station, the Toontown Station, and the Tomorrowland Station. The railroad also features 2 dark ride-ish segments, one where you visit the Grand Canyon and another one where you go back in time and visit the dinosaurs. Not quite sure how that works. Apparently, the railroad was the first attraction completed at Disneyland. They then used the railroad to get the supplies across to different parts of the park, sort of a pre-Disneyland transportation network. Here's another little secret. When you enter the Grand Canyon display on the Disneyland Railroad, look towards the rear of the train and you'll see a white security camera. This security camera is not in use anymore, but it was installed sometime in the 90s because the money carts that they used at the end of the day to collect money throughout the park would be transported underneath the diorama at the end of the day. Apparently, money money began disappearing from the carts and the camera was installed to observe a section that was previously unobserved. They took it down later once the problem was solved. Remember back in that little history segment when we talked about Ward Kimball, Walt's friend who had a train in his backyard? The Ward Kimball is the only locomotive at Disneyland that is not named after a Santa Fe Railroad president like E.P. Ripley or Fred Gurley. Two more little pieces of trivia for you. There used to be another train line that traveled from Main Street to New Orleans Square, then to Frontierland, and then back. That is why there is another building on the opposite side of the New Orleans Square train station. That used to be the old Frontierland station, which serviced the depot train that went from Main Street to Frontierland and back. Fun fact. And while we're in New Orleans Square, why don't we talk about the piece of trivia that everybody knows? The Morse code coming from the station across the track is Walt Disney's opening day speech for Disneyland. If you know Morse code or have a translator, make sure to listen in and you'll hear part of the speech. I don't think it's the whole thing because that would go way too long. And apparently, not a whole lot of people remember the Viewliner. It was a miniature version of the Disneyland Railroad that ran alongside it. It was only open for a little over a year and had two trains, the Tomorrowland train and the Fantasyland train. Eventually, a more futuristic version of the Disneyland Railroad was built, what we know today as the monorail. So again, to reiterate, why is the Disneyland Railroad so important? We wouldn't have Disneyland without it, both figuratively and literally. The idea of Disneyland would have never existed without the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, and they used to transport building materials from one place to another with the railroad. So the train was actually responsible for helping build physical structures at the park. And with the railroad opening up later this week, oh wow, we'll be able to see new parts of the railroad redone and maybe even refurbished. So that'll be nice to see a new railroad for a new generation of kids, even though it won't be changed that much. It'll just have one more extra little part to it. The Star Wars land part, the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge part. Oh yeah, and something bad happened at the railroad in 1955 within a week of the park's opening. I was gonna save this one for last because it's just so crazy. On July 17th, 1955, a brakesman pulled the switch connecting the Disneyland Railroad's main line with a sliding Main Street USA station too soon. The caboose on the end of the freight train had not made it fully across the switch in the tracks when it was pulled, and as a result, the caboose's front end of wheels correctly traveled along the siding, while the rear set of wheels incorrectly traveled along the main line towards the passenger train, causing the caboose to swing to the side before colliding with a concrete slab and derailing upon impact. Now, if that wasn't crazy enough, the person who was operating the train at the time fled the scene and was never seen again. He did this apparently to avoid punishment. Gladly, no injuries were reported, and they stopped using slidings at Disneyland the next year. So yes, the Disneyland Railroad is both beautiful and dangerous. It's not really that dangerous anymore, it's completely safe, don't worry. Now, if you guys know me, if there's one thing that I love, it's Disney. And if there's one thing that burns a hole in my pocket every time I visit the parks, it's the merchandise. Just so much stuff to choose from. Popcorn buckets or pins, everything. I love it all. But you know, there are some things you just cannot buy at the parks. Are you so into Disney that you wish you had a Polynesian Resort room number sign? No, just me? Oh, well, okay. Well, I mean, if you like pop culture, Disney, Zelda, Destiny, or Fallout, please visit Ye Olde Prop Shop on Etsy and at their website, yeoldepropshop.myshopify.com. They got so many cool slamming things over there. They got room signs, they got Destiny raid coasters, they got the Sheikah Slate tablet. They've got everything that you need for a nerdy, great time, whether or not you're into Disney or Destiny or Zelda. Seriously, check this out. This stuff is so cool. I'm probably gonna order some stuff for myself and show them off at a later date just because I think all this stuff is awesome. Seriously, go check it out. You will not regret it. Hey guys, how's it going? I hope you guys all liked this video about the Disneyland Railroad. Make sure to check out some other videos that you think you might enjoy. I'm going to make a whole playlist so it's going to make it easier to binge watch all of my videos if you guys would like that. We've got one more video before things start kicking into full gear, so make sure to stick around for that next week, and then everything is going to start changing for the better. Don't worry, you guys, it's going to be awesome. I really hope you guys enjoy what's going to be happening within the next few weeks. Anyways, aside from that, I don't think I have anything else to say, so I love you guys. I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.